All right, let's journey back in time to Strasbourg in the summer of 1518. I want you to imagine something truly bizarre. Hundreds of people suddenly start dancing in the streets, and they just can't stop. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for weeks on end. This isn't a fairy tale, it actually happened. And today, we're going to unpack one of the strangest events in all of European history.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. This wasn't some joyous festival. People who saw it said there was no happiness in it. It was frantic, it was compulsive, it was a terrifying spectacle that gripped an entire city, and absolutely no one could figure out what was going on.
So how in the world does something like this even start? Well, believe it or not, this citywide fever didn't begin with a huge crowd. It all started with just one person. Her name was Frau Troffea. And one day, in the middle of July, she just stepped out of her home and into the street and started to dance. No music playing, no party happening. She just danced, all by herself, seemingly unable to stop for almost an entire week.
And just look at how quickly this thing spread. I mean, the timeline is staggering. It starts with one woman. A week later, there are dozens of people dancing alongside her. By August, you have up to 400 people caught in this constant frenzied motion. And then, just as mysteriously as it all began, it starts to fade away in early September. Now, let's be really clear about what this looked like, because it was absolutely brutal. We're talking about constant spastic convulsions. People's arms were thrashing about. Their feet were swollen and literally bleeding through their shoes. You could hear them crying out for help, completely trapped by their own bodies, until they just collapsed from pure agonizing exhaustion. So, faced with this completely terrifying and unexplainable plague, you'd assume the city authorities would have a pretty sensible, thought-out plan, right? Well, you would be very, very wrong. In fact, their response probably made everything a whole lot worse. Yep, you are reading that correctly. The city's official diagnosis was something they called hot blood. And their brilliant prescription was even more dancing. The theory, if you can call it that, was that the dancers just had to get it all out of their systems. It was a truly catastrophic mistake. So first, they leaned right into it. They actually built stages, cleared out halls, and hired musicians to keep the people dancing around the clock. Of course, that only seemed to attract more people to join the frenzy. Realizing this was a terrible idea, they did a complete 180 and banned all public music. And when that didn't work, they went for a supernatural solution, forcing the dancers on a pilgrimage to a shrine for Saint Vitus, who ironically was the saint they believed could both cause and cure this kind of compulsive dancing. Now, maybe the pilgrimage worked, or maybe the whole thing was just burning itself out. Whatever the reason, the dancing eventually stopped. But that was just the beginning of a mystery that has puzzled us for over 500 years.
I mean, really think about it. What could possibly cause something like this? It's the central question. Was it some kind of disease, a poison, a religious curse, or was it something else entirely?
Now, before we dig into the modern theories, we have to tackle this really grim question. Later historical accounts, written years after the event, claim that up to 15 people a day were dying from heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. But, and this is a major point of debate, the actual city records from 1518 don't mention a single death. So, the true death toll is still a mystery.
All right, so let's get into the modern explanations. And today, the debate has really been narrowed down to two leading theories, one that's physical and one that's psychological. So on one hand, you have ergotism, basically food poisoning from a fungus that grows on rye bread. And on the other hand, you have mass psychogenic illness, which is more commonly known as mass hysteria, usually triggered by intense stress. So was it poison or was it panic? Let's take a look. The ergotism theory seems pretty compelling at first glance, right? This fungus has psychoactive chemicals that are actually related to LSD, which could definitely cause spasms and hallucinations. And since rye was a staple food back then, it seems to fit perfectly. Well, here's where that theory really starts to crumble. The historian John Waller, who is one of the leading experts on this, points out some huge problems. See, ergot poisoning also restricts blood flow to your limbs, which would make coordinated, non-stop dancing for days pretty much physically impossible. Plus, it's highly unlikely that so many different people would all react in the exact same way by dancing. It just doesn't add up.
And that brings us to the theory that most historians accept today. Mass psychogenic illness isn't about a poison or germ. It's about the power of the mind. It's a collective stress response, where a whole group of people's psychological pain actually manifests as a shared physical symptom. In this case, that symptom was dancing. So if this was a contagion of the mind, you have to ask, what on earth made the people of Strasbourg so vulnerable to it? And the answer, it turns out, is everything about the world they were living in.
You really have to put yourself in their shoes. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city teetering on the edge. There was famine, there was disease everywhere. The people were living under extreme psychological stress, and they were also deeply superstitious. And crucially, they held a powerful belief that an angry saint, Saint Vitus, could literally send down a dancing curse as a form of punishment. It was the absolute perfect storm for a mass stress-induced breakdown.
So here's the key takeaway. The dancers weren't faking it, and they probably weren't poisoned. They were likely caught in a kind of mass, stress-induced psychosis. Their minds, completely overwhelmed by fear and hardship, latched on to this cultural idea of a dancing curse and made it a terrifying physical reality.
And this all leaves us with one last, kind of unsettling question to think about. In our world of social media, viral trends, and collective anxiety, the tools for social contagion are stronger than ever. The context is different, of course, but the human mind is still vulnerable to suggestion and stress. It really makes you wonder, what would a modern dancing plague even look like?